blessings. It's your brother, New Possibilities, and today I'm going to talk about hip hop. As you all know, this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. It's hard to believe, but hip hop has been around for 50 years. And a lot of times I hear about classic albums, and they celebrate the anniversary of these albums, and they'll mention that an album has been around for like 25 years. And I'm just like, wow, I'm really getting old and time is really flying by. And yeah, but it's been 50 years since hip hop. And so what I want to do is take time to just show my appreciation towards hip hop, talk about like some of my favorite hip hop artists, talk about my favorite producers, favorite rap groups, favorite MCs of all times, and favorite women MCs as well. And I really want to hear what you all have to say as well. I want to hear about your feedback on some of these issues. Shout out to the few people that are tuning in right now. I'm trying to get back to doing live videos so that people can interact with me in live time and real time. Um, and part of this video is inspired by this art display that we have here in Baltimore. And it's at the Baltimore Museum of Art. It's entitled The Culture, and it's celebrating hip hop and the 50 years of hip hop. And I've seen quite a few posts about hip hop, like rankings of different artists and all that kind of stuff. And I just wanted to take time to share my thoughts about this hip hop and, just some of my favorite moments in hip hop. First of all, I just want to begin by talking about when did you first fall in love? And for people that are watching this live and people that will watch it later, I really want to hear when did you first fall in love with hip hop? And for me, I first got like captivated by hip hop when I heard a couple of songs. The first song would be Rapper's Delight. That was the very first rap song that I heard in my life. And, I was captivated by it. And it was like, one of the great songs that we would play regularly. It used a sample from the song, I think it's called Good Times, but they used that sample, from a hit song. It was the first time I heard people rapping over a beat. It was a great song. And it's a song that brings back real great memories um, to me. And, so that's one of my first hip hop memories. Another hip hop memory that I have, and I know this goes, these things go way back for some of our young people. Some of our young people weren't even born when these songs came out. And I will get to your comments as we're going on. But another song is The Message by Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. That was one of the first substantive rap songs that I heard in my life. And I think that though, that song in particular laid the foundation for modern day hip hop. A lot of the songs that you hear of today like touch upon these themes that are neglected by mainstream media and stuff like that. That was one of the most hard songs that I heard in my life, and I was like, it talked about the life in the street and all that kind of stuff, about the struggles that young men go through and about the conditions in urban areas, so-called ghettos and stuff like that. That was really a compelling song. So those are the moments like when I first fell in love with hip hop. And then at that particular time, you had movies about hip hop, Breakin' and all these other movies, Beat Street. And even before then, you had like a classic film, Wild Style, which I learned about later. At the time when it came out, I wasn't even aware of it. It was something that I later found out about and learned to appreciate. And that reminds me that hip hop is not just about rapping. It also includes DJing and graffiti artists, dancers, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a whole culture. It's a way that people dress and all that kind of stuff. And even though like I identify with hip hop and I feel hip hop and I love hip hop, I don't think that I was like completely immersed in it. Like, some people wear hip hop gear and they speak in the language of hip hop and stuff like that. And to some degree, that's true with me, but I wasn't fully immersed in it like other people. But that was the moment when I fell in love, and I'm really interested in hearing from y'all. Like, when did you first fall in love? When did hip hop become an art form that you learned to love and appreciate? So, people that are watching this on the playback, I really want to hear from you what you think about that. Oh, okay. So I see that John, the professional, said I think it should be 30 years of hip hop, not 50. And he's just laughing out loud. And he says that the last 20 have been trash. I can't say that the last 20 have been trash, period. I think that a lot of the popular art, some of it has been trash. Some of it hasn't been quality art. Uh, some of it has been like a whole bunch of MCs that don't really write substantive lyrics and stuff like that. And, where everybody's just copying everybody. There was a time when people used to be condemned for copying other rappers. And, back in the day, we used to call that biting and stuff. And I'm sure some people still use that terminology and stuff. But back in the day, biting was viewed as something negative. It was viewed as negative not to be original, not to have your own style and own swag and all that kind of stuff. But today, you just have people like reproducing the same types of music over and over, the same cookie cutter model that you hear, and you have low frequency in terms of the messaging of a lot of hip hop. A lot of it is negative. A lot of today's hip hop, anyway, is real negative. There was a time, for instance, when people would clown people for being a quote unquote crackhead or junkie or something like that. But today's generation celebrates that. They celebrate abusing drugs. They celebrate being dope fiends and, using, for instance, what they call lean and drinking codeine and all that kind of stuff. They celebrate that stuff when really that stuff is really equivalent to heroin and all that kind of stuff. And we wonder why we have, opioid pandemic and all that kind of stuff in our community, or epidemic. Um, so yeah, I hear what you're saying. There is a lot of garbage hip hop out there in recent years, but at the same time, you have that garbage hip hop, or trash as you refer to it as. There have also been quality music released at that time. It hasn't been as popular, but it's still been present. So I hear what you're saying. Somebody said, B1 for Life said, I was always everything when it came to hip hop, but I was whack at all of it. Uh, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but yeah, so let's get into this discussion. There are a couple of things that I want to talk about with respect to hip hop. And, the first and most obvious topic when it comes to hip hop are who are the greatest MCs of all time. And again, for people that are watching this later, I want to hear from you. Like, who are your favorite MCs of all time? And I'm just going to name some of my favorites. And I'm going to start with the people that are least popular, that most people don't mention for the most part. And one of them is MF Doom. MF Doom is by far one of the most original MCs that have ever been in the game. His word play is very creative, innovative, hilarious. He has classic albums, classic underground albums rather, such as Food and, um, other albums that he's had like Doomsday uh, and Vaudeville Villain and so many other albums. He has a lot of great albums, great lyrics, creative lyrics, hilarious lyrics. He's on a whole nother level. And unfortunately, the brother passed away, but I think that as time goes on, he will become more and more appreciated by hip hop culture. And a lot of people pay homage to him. For instance, I saw this photo of The Weeknd wearing a mask similar to MF Doom's mask, paying homage to MF Doom. And the other day I was walking around with an MF Doom shirt on, t-shirt on, and a lot of people complimented it out of respect for MF Doom as an MC. He's by far one of the most underrated MCs, and for me, he deserves to be on that top 10 list just based on his creativity, his lyricism, you know, his humor, his seriousness. Like he has some rhymes that are serious, some rhymes that are, so he has a lot of versatility. You know, a lot of artists will stick to one particular subject, but he talked about a wide range of things and he just had fun with hip hop. And that's one of the elements that a lot of times is missing from today's hip hop. So he's in my list. Another MC that's in my list is Black Thought from the Roots. I mean, Black Thought by far is one of the most skilled MCs, one of the most talented MCs. Um, this brother has a spectacular flow, great lyrics. He's been on a lot of classic albums, not only the Roots albums, but he's been featured on many other albums. And he did a freestyle like about a year ago or so on Funk Flex, and he just tore that down. And it's few MCs that can be compared to him when it comes to spitting live. That was by far one of the best live performances that I've seen any hip hop MC participate in. This brother has been on all these classic Roots albums, albums such as How I Got Over, all these countless Roots albums, so many albums. Um, so he is by far one of my favorite MCs. And of course, you have people like Nas and Jay-Z. Jay-Z and Nas came out in the early 90s, mid to early 90s, and even to this day, they are still relevant, still producing high quality music. Uh, they are still being played and featured on so many other people's albums and stuff. So those two MCs are by far some of my favorite MCs. Nas is probably as far as I'm concerned, the greatest of all times. Like he's one of the artists that I regularly play, and Jay-Z too. I play them all the time, and I think that that's one of the measures of how great music is. From an individual perspective, like how often do you listen to it? How often do you play it? And Nas and Jay-Z are on that level of being among the greatest of the greats. And we could have a conversation about about the epic battle that they engaged in. Again, that's a testimony to their greatness as MCs. Because a lot of people, for instance, when they heard the takeover, they thought it was over for Nas because Jay-Z destroyed all these people in one song. He really went at one of my favorite MCs, who I'll talk about later, Prodigy. With this, where he basically talking about how Prodigy was a dancer. He said when he was back when Jay-Z was pushing weight in '88, you was a ballerina. I got the pictures. I seen you, all that kind of stuff, man. And then he says like these bars where he's taking shots at Mobb Deep or Prodigy in particular, saying like "Twinkle Toes, you're breaking my heart." He just goes all the way off in that song, and that song produced like one of the most quoted lines in hip hop, and that's that line, "I don't believe you need more people." So Jay-Z went off in that song. That's by far one of my favorite diss songs ever made, and so people thought it was curtains for Nas because he also dissed Nas in that song. He's talking about Nas don't want it for Hove, just don't want it with Hove and all that kind of stuff. And he goes off on Nas, and Nas came back with Ether, which basically set the standard in diss songs. But that's a whole nother conversation about favorite diss songs. Those two are among my favorite MCs, and they produce some of my favorite diss songs ever made. You can't mention a top 10 without mentioning Biggie, better known as the Notorious B.I.G. I mean, he's by far one of the greatest MCs of all times. Even though he only had time to produce 2 albums, Both of those albums are undisputed classics. You know, Ready to Die and Life Before Death have some of the best songs in hip hop history on them. So Biggie is definitely in that list. You know, he's definitely one of the best MCs. And if he didn't pass away, I don't even know if somebody like Jay-Z would be as relevant as they are today in terms of hip hop. Because, you know, if you reflect back on the 90s, Jay-Z was just another great MC at the time because there were plenty of great MCs around that time. You had Nas, you had Tupac, you had you had Black Moon featuring, Buckshot, who was a great MC. You had all of these spectacular MCs at the time. You had Big L. So Jay-Z was just one among many greats at the time, but through time he's managed to become known as one of the best. And I think that if Biggie had lived longer, that may not be the case. Biggie may have, would have had way more classic albums probably if he had time to be around. So if he was alive, rather, if he was still alive, may he rest in peace. Another obvious choice, this who's on many people's lists, is Tupac. And I know some people downplay Tupac. They say, well, Tupac was not the best lyricist and all that kind of stuff. People get into that conversation. Um, Sometimes it's not just about like having intricate lyrics and all these multi rhyming schemes in your bars and all that kind of stuff and all this clever wordplay. All that stuff is great, it's creative and stuff like that. But that's not all that there is to hip hop. Hip hop is about charisma. Hip hop is about resonating with your audience, saying stuff that people could feel, saying stuff that outlast the test of time. And Tupac is one of those artists. Songs that he's put out are memorable. And the thing is, Tupac had depth to him. He had dimension to him. He wasn't just limited in his messaging. He didn't just talk about street life. And he wasn't just some conscious rapper limited to just talking about politics or, you know, consciousness and all that kind of stuff. He was multidimensional. He was contradictory in many respects. While he celebrated women, he also made misogynistic lyrics and stuff like that. So there was a lot of dimensions to Tupac. And his music was music that you could feel. You could feel when he was talking about Dear Mama, even as a crack fiend mama, you always was a black queen mama. You could feel that. You could feel when he talked about Brenda's baby and stuff like that. You could feel those lyrics. And you could feel his pain when he went off on Biggie in that song, Hit 'Em Up. So that's the thing with Tupac. So he's definitely among the greatest of all time. He's definitely on my list of top 10 MCs. And you can't even mention a top 10 list without mentioning Rakim. And I see that B1 for Life mentioned Rakim as well. Rakim, you can't have a list without Rakim because Rakim, first of all, was ahead of his time. And before I get into that, I'll just say this about Tupac as well. Tupac inspired a whole generation of rap artists. Before Tupac, rap artists were rarely having all these tattoos and stuff like that. Before Tupac, you didn't have this thug ethos in hip hop and all that kind of stuff, which he helped bring about. Even though that's not a positive thing, it shows his impact. It shows that he is an icon when it comes to hip hop. And yeah, so he had a big influence. You can't even listen to a Lil Wayne or see a Lil Wayne, somebody like a Lil Wayne, without seeing the influence of somebody like a Tupac. So yeah, I was talking about Rakim. So Rakim was ahead of his time. Like he came out at a time when people had really simplistic raps and stuff like that. They didn't use, their raps were real basic, and they all had many of them had a hyped up style where they were all animated and fired up and stuff like that. But Rakim was one of the first MCs that had a smooth flow, a laid back flow, and a deep flow where he was talking about things, not just boasting and bragging like many MCs, but he was also dropping knowledge between those bars that, that on the surface a lot of people wouldn't catch. So he inspired a whole generation of MCs because he took rap in a different direction. The way he would rhyme, the things that he would rhyme about. He was one of the first, if not the first, 5% rap artist, dropping that 5% knowledge in his rhymes and stuff like that. And after him, you had others follow suit. You had many 5%ers become MCs and stuff like that. Because as many people know, the 5%ers, just as a religious group, if you want to call it that, were into, building and talking and spitting game basically when they would break down the knowledge and do the mathematics and all that kind of stuff. So it's natural that rap will be a part of that movement. And, Rakim basically laid the foundation for all these artists that would come later. Artists such as Wu-Tang Clan, artists such as Nas and all these other great artists. So because of that, his influence is undeniable and he has to be ranked among the greatest of all times. And then he's produced classic albums. All of the MCs on here on this list have produced classic albums. He had Paid in Full, Follow the Leader, and even his later albums were highly ranked, like Let the Rhythm Hit 'Em and Don't Sweat the Technique. Those albums are quality albums. Many of them are classic albums that people use as a blueprint today. And the same is true. I'll go back to Nas and Jay-Z. The same is true for Nas and Jay-Z. Nas, for instance, he released Illmatic, which is by far one of the greatest albums ever made, period. And I would argue that even though some people rank Illmatic above It Was Written, some could make the argument that It Was Written was better than Illmatic. Nas is just a great MC, and another classic that he had was Stillmatic, which would be like my favorite, if he didn't release Illmatic. So yeah, that's those MCs. Another MC that has to be mentioned in my top 5 would be Eminem. And before I go into that, I'm just going to look through the comments real quick. Yeah, I see that B1 mentioned Tupac. And then groups, we'll talk about groups in a second. And shout out to Fredro for mentioning the old school groups. I grew up on all of those groups. I loved their music back in the day. I loved the whole Roxanne controversy in hip hop. Everybody knows about UTFO. For old heads, rather. Young people may not know about them. But, Run DMC, of course. Like, they're by far one of my greatest groups. We'll get into that in a second. So yeah, you gotta have. So the next artist I was gonna mention is Eminem. And I know for some people it's controversial that he would be in the list, but many people acknowledge that Eminem is one of the greatest MCs ever. Regardless of his race or whatever, his race, as far as I'm concerned, it's relevant in terms of his record sales. Like, of course, if because of his whiteness, I think that's probably why he is. I think he may be the most selling hip hop artist as far as I know. I know that there are other highly ranked artists, but I think that he has sold more albums than many other hip hop artists. And I think that in part that's due because of his race, because white people can identify with him. If someone has a wider appeal than just black people, they're going to sell more records. And I think that that's part of the reason why Eminem sold more records than a lot of MCs. And I don't think that record sales alone determine somebody's worth or their greatness or their skill. But with that being said, Eminem is not just some pop artist that sells a lot of albums. He's a great MC, a great lyricist, very creative and innovative in his works and in the way that he rhymes. His, I like MCs that are able to take you through the full gambit of emotions, from laughter to sorrow to anger. And that's what Eminem has done in his albums. His very first album, Slim Shady album, like he talked about some gruesome things, like in a hilarious way, which is really genius in some respects, like that 97, I think it's 97 Bonnie and Clyde, where he's talking about like his baby mother and killing her and all that kind of stuff and throwing her body in the lake or river or whatever. That is a real creative rhyme, as sick as the subject matter is. He has so many other rhymes, and he makes it funny. He makes something horrific like that funny, and that just speaks to his lyrical skills and talent. So that album was a great album, even though he had like these little pop songs on there, like "My Name Is" and all that kind of stuff. And I like that song, but it's a pop song. He also had songs on his album that proved himself as an MC. So you got that album, you got the Marshall Mathers album, and he had one other album. I think it's the Eminem Show. Those are my three favorite Eminem albums. And even now he puts out quality music. I don't listen to him as much as I used to back when he first came out, like back around the time of the Marshall Mathers album. That's when I listened to him the most, and even around the time of the Eminem Show. But but yeah, he's still a top tier MC. Just the way he rhymes and what his lyricism makes him a top tier MC. Another person that would be on my list, and this is somebody that in the past I would be like, why are you even mentioning this guy as a great MC? Like, why is he even in the conversation? And that's Lil Wayne. Like, it's I know some people may be shocked to hear me say that, but I think that Lil Wayne has earned a spot in the top 10 in terms of his influence, his clever wordplay, his ability to do different type of flows, fast flows, slow flows. And that kind of reminds me of Biggie, like how Biggie was able to change his flow too. I mean, I'm sure that many of you have heard that song where Biggie's with Bone Thugs and Harmony, and he's basically rhyming in a way that flows with Bone Thugs and Harmony. Again, showing his skill level, showing his versatility. And I think the same is with Lil Wayne, how Wayne is able to do all these different flows and all that kind of stuff. And I would give an honorable mention to Drake. Drake is a great MC despite people criticizing him and stuff like that and downplaying his significance. The fact of the matter is Drake produces great music, but I'm not going to put him in my top 10, but he's an honorable mention. And the last person that I want to mention is Mos Def. Mos Def is by far one of my favorite MCs. He definitely deserves a spot on that top 10, and I'll put him there. He's creative. He's participated in some classic albums like his Black on Both Sides, his Black Star album. And again, like one of the things that I look for is continuing relevance. And he's, done some his recent album with Talib Kweli, this No Fear of Time. And, if you're not on Luminary, I encourage you to get on there so that you could listen to that classic album. But yeah, so he's in my top 10. That's the last person that I'll mention in my top 10. And as an honorable mention, I'll say that Common is one of my favorite MCs as well. But I won't put him in the list. I wish I could put all these people in the top 10. Common has my favorite Common albums are, One Day It'll Make Sense and Water for Chocolate or something to that effect. Those are my two favorite Common albums. And B is another great album of Commons that I really enjoyed. That album was produced by Kanye West. So let's see. Since I mentioned favorite MCs just in general, I'm going to mention my favorite women MCs. And I was having a conversation, and for me, it's just like it was challenging coming together with a list of women MCs, especially in today's time where you have a whole bunch of these copycat women MCs. And that goes back to the point about music being trash today. You got all these copycat women MCs that basically are into promoting like what has been called thought culture and all that kind of stuff. That's what their music is about. It's like strippers turn rapper type of energy or whatever. That's what a lot of the energy is about in women's rap today. A lot of sexually explicit stuff and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm not really into that. So I don't really listen to a lot of today's women's MCs that much. Occasionally there's some that I'll hear every now and then, like they have a couple of songs. But for the most part, I don't listen to today's generation of women's MCs. Other than a couple of songs by Cardi, but other than that, I don't really listen to this stuff. So let me talk about my favorite MCs. Of course, Lauryn Hill is on my list of favorite MCs. Lauryn Hill is by far one of the best women MCs ever. Even though she only had like one solid studio album as a solo MC, she is by far one of the greatest MCs ever, period. She could have been on that top 10 list, and I wouldn't argue with somebody placing her on the top 10 list for all MCs, period. But she is definitely one of the best women MCs, if not the best, if not the GOAT. Her classic album, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, that's an album all these years later I still play over and over again. It's an album all these years later that I could still appreciate the lyrics on. So yeah, Lauryn Hill is definitely in the list. Another MC is MC Lyte. You can't mention women MCs without mentioning MC Lyte. She laid the foundation back in the 80s and early 90s, producing, some of the best songs in hip hop. Another one is Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah represented the women back in that era. Strong image of women, one of the conscious rap artists of that era. Just her title, Queen, speaks a lot. And, this idea of ladies first and, celebrating women. That's what she represented. And she represented royalty, like her, the image that she presented as an MC back then is an image that we need to see more of, more positive images of our women. And even though there's some negative aspects to this next person I'm going to mention. I see somebody said Lauryn Hill. They said that Lauryn Hill doesn't write all of her rhymes. I don't know about that. Like I've heard some people speculate about that. And I think that is a factor that someone can consider when they're deciding whether or not to rank someone as a top tier MC. So I need to do more research on that. I'm not sure about what you're saying, but I still rank her as one of the best. Like in terms of the imagery that she promoted, in terms of the lyrics that she promoted, in terms of her skill set as a rap artist and as a singer. You don't have that much versatility in rap anymore. There aren't that many rap artists that are great singers and rap artists. So for that alone, that places her in a whole nother category compared to other MCs. Another MC that I have respect for, and I was really debating whether or not to put her on the list. That would be Remy Ma. She even though she doesn't have any classic albums, she has classic features, and she has proven her skill set just with a lot of her rhymes. And one rhyme in particular is her diss song against Nicki Minaj. And Nicki Minaj has to be on this list, despite what I was saying earlier about like a lot of what this rap generation is promoting. I think that she, along with Little Kim, helped lay the foundation for a lot of this decadent women's rap that we see, you know, that celebrates thought culture and all that kind of stuff. But they can't be denied. And Little Kim is on this list as well because there would be no Nicki Minaj without a Little Kim. You know, they came at a time when before then, women MCs really didn't flaunt their sexuality. They didn't flaunt their sex appeal. A lot of times, women at that time, before Little Kim and Foxy Brown, who's another person that I would that's going to be on this list. Before that time, they didn't do that. They wore baggy clothes and they basically rhymed like men, even if their subject matter was different. Like, you know, a lot of them had that tomboy type appearance. You know, like, for instance, even MC Light, even though she was feminine to some degree, she still had that tomboy type of energy about herself. So they brought sexiness to the game, you know, Little Kim. And she laid her and Foxy Brown laid that foundation. And for that reason, they're on this list of favorite women MCs. Yeah, so I would put them on this list. Another person that's on this list of women MCs is Eve, and Rhapsody is one of my favorite MCs of today's generation. She's put out some great music. Her album Eve, I think that's the name of her album, where she raps about all women. It's an album just about women. Um, that's a great album with some thought provoking and powerful lyrics. So she's definitely on that list. Another MC that I forgot to mention, and I'm going to get to your comments in a second. Another MC that I was going to mention is Rod Digger, and I just wish that Rod Digger did more music. But she's proven herself as an MC. Like she's definitely one of my favorite women MCs. Hard lyrics. She went bar for bar with Lauryn Hill on the Fugees album and stuff. On this particular track, I think it's called Cowboy, something like that, where she's rhyming with Lauryn Hill, and she's rhymed with like the greatest, like Busta Rhymes, and Busta Rhymes deserves an honorable mention among the top MCs because he's been in the game forever, but he has still remained relevant. He still has the same skill set, or he's even improved since his early days when he first emerged on the scene. A great MC, one of the best who ever did it. So he's definitely worthy of an honorable mention in my top 10 of MCs. So I'm really interested in hearing from y'all. Who did I miss? So I see some comments that people left. So someone mentioned Jean Grey, and I've heard some of Jean Grey's music before. I know that she had some songs with Talib Kweli, and she's done quite a few albums and stuff like that, and she's highly respected. But I'm not as familiar with her music, and maybe what I'll do is get acquainted with her music, and I may have to reevaluate and revisit this list after listening to her. The Brat is a good MC. Like I enjoy the Brat too, but I only know her for a couple of songs. Like I don't know her music like that. Like I know like So Functified, which is a great song. I love her flow and I like her style and stuff, but I don't know enough about her to put her on my particular list. Um, yeah, so I had to mention her. I had to respond to that comment that you left. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I mentioned MC Light earlier. I mentioned her earlier for, as I see, our JD mentioned. Yeah, she's definitely one of my favorite MCs. I still play her music today, and for me, that's the test of the music. Like if I'm not playing your music, then that means that I must not really be feeling it like that, or I must not be aware of it. And she's one of the artists that I still play. Like I play MC Light regularly. She's on my playlist of rhymes from the '80s, I think. So yeah, she's definitely on there. And so the next category that I want to talk about is, yeah, she definitely does flow similar. She does remind me of Snoop. That's a good comparison for the brat. Um, there are a couple of artists that I have to mention as, and these are artists that had the potential to blow up, to be, incredible. These are artists that had all this buzz, but their career never went where it should have gone for whatever reason. And I'm just going to name like three people that fit that category. The first one is Jay Electronica. Jay Electronica is by far one of my favorite MCs. Like I've heard a lot of his songs before he even released his album. He did a lot of songs on the underground. A lot of powerful tracks like "Tune Into the Infinite" and Exhibit B, Exhibit C, excuse me, Exhibit A and Exhibit C, and those types of songs. Um, and others, plenty of other underground songs that weren't on any official album. He's a great, spectacular MC, but I think the problem with Jay Electronica is he didn't seize the time. He didn't seize the time by releasing albums in a timely fashion when the iron was hot. He didn't release albums when the buzz was buzzing. He waited too long to release an album, and he's waiting far too long to release a next album. And he's missing his moment because of this. This man, Jay Electronica, should be mentioned in people's top tens. He should be a top 10 greatest of all time MC, but he missed his opportunity by playing around with time. And time is not promised to any of us. So he should have been releasing albums, more albums than he has released. Because he missed an opportunity, and it's not too late for him. He just needs to seize the time. And he's not doing that right now. He's taking his sweet time releasing albums and stuff like that. And then when he did finally release an album, it was basically an album with Jay-Z, and he should have had his own solo project where he would solely shine. And that's one of the things that's messed up. Yeah, I agree with you, Royale. Yeah, he had Jay-Z all on that album. It was like a Jay-Z, Jay Electronica album instead of a Jay Electronica album. And, people were basically saying, some people were saying Jay-Z outshined Jay Electronica on his album. I disagree with that. Like, I think that Jay Electronica held his own and proved himself as an MC on that album. But the thing is, you don't let somebody share that much shine on your first release. I mean, it's okay to have features, but you need to get time to shine on your own, uh, especially for your first project. And I think that was a missed opportunity. That should have been all Jay Electronica. That's what it should have been. Like some of my favorite albums from MCs are those albums where it's primarily about them, like Illmatic, where he on Illmatic, Nas didn't have hardly any features on there. The only song he had a feature on was with AZ, and AZ was only on there for, he was only on one track, and he was the only featured artist on there. And at the time, AZ wasn't even known as well as he is right now. He wasn't like somebody that was on there to bring attention to the album or to sell the album. He was just on there, and he had a great feature on there, but he didn't outshine Nas and take over Nas's album. And I think that that's one of the messed up things about that Jay Electronica release. That could have been an opportunity for Jay Electronica to shine the way he's meant to shine. So Jay Electronica has all this potential, but he hasn't realized it yet. Another person is Cannabis. Like Cannabis, when he came out, like a lot of people he had all this buzz. People were talking about his skill set, saying he was one of the greatest to ever do it and stuff like that. And then he just lost his potential. He didn't realize his potential, rather. He got into that beef with what's his name, with LL Cool J, and that sidetracked his career. I think that was detrimental to his career in many respects. Not because he lost lyrically. I think his song, Second Round Knockout, was one of the greatest diss songs ever, and I still play it to this day. I definitely think it was better than LL Cool J's response to him, but I think that messed up that hurt his career. And he, after that, he had some albums, and they had some great songs on them and stuff like that, but they weren't as well produced as they could have been. They weren't well marketed as they could have been. He missed his opportunity, and it got to a point where he was reduced to participating in these rap battles with unsigned artists and stuff like that, and he got destroyed in this one battle where he was reading from his rhyme book instead of rhyming live. That's where his career went, when he had all this potential to be one of the greatest MCs ever in rap. But that's what happened to him. Another person that I viewed as having so much potential is Royce the 5'9". Like when Royce the 5'9" came out way back in the day in the early 90s, I was like, man, he got some, he's gonna be one of the greatest MCs to ever do it. Like I heard him on this song with Mos Def and this brother from the West Coast. I'm blanking on his name, but you all probably know what song I'm talking about. But I heard him on that song, and I was like, man, he's gonna be representing for my city. I'm originally from Detroit, and I was like, man, he's gonna be one of the greatest MCs. And he has released some great albums. He's been around for a number of years. He was a part of that group Slaughterhouse that Eminem created and all that kind of stuff. But the sad reality is, despite all the connections and all the albums he released, he's been reduced to like a sidekick, Eminem's side man or sidekick, Eminem's Robin. That's what he's been reduced to. Eminem's stand is there to defend Eminem no matter what. That's what he's been reduced to. And that's not to say that he's not a great lyricist and all that kind of stuff. He is a great lyricist, but it takes more than lyricism. It takes more than like intricate wordplay and all that kind of stuff to be great. And when I think about it, and this is just me, and I'm sure people could correct me if I'm, and have different views on this. But for me, that's not enough. Like, I can't think of any rhyme of his that like stands out that I'm quoting and this super memorable, or some song where I'm like, man, he killed it on that song. Like, that's a classic or anything like that. I can't think of any of that stuff. And I'm sure some people are going to think about that. They're going to probably mention a couple of things. Yeah, and it's like and I see that somebody mentioned too many bad productions, and I think that there's something to that, just about some of these artists. Like half of the music is the actual music itself. It's actually about melody and harmony and all that kind of stuff. And some people think that, oh, if I had the best lyrics and I had this intricate wordplay and, all these metaphors and similes and all that, I'm going to be the greatest ever. But that's just part of the rap game. It's about presence, it's about the sound of the music, it's about the beats. The beats are half of the music. Like without good beats, it doesn't matter how great your lyrics are. And a lot of times that's been the case, like with Royce the 5'9". If you listen to his albums, a lot of them have whack beats. Let's be blunt about it. Like a lot of his albums where it's just him, they not all that when it comes to the beats and stuff like that. One exception is like he did that album with DJ Premier, and I really need to go back and listen to it. That may be one of the few exceptions in the album he did with Slaughterhouse. But he just doesn't stand out like just as an MC period, and in that group in particular. It's not like, oh, I can remember one of his best rhymes, and somebody like a Kanye West, like even though like you can say, well, Kanye West is not a memorable lyricist and all that. He don't. I mean, well, not memorable. That Kanye West is not a great lyricist. He doesn't do all this intricate wordplay. All that may be true, but you can memorize his stuff. His sayings and his stuff is everywhere. And that's going to take me to the next subject. But yeah, I just think that Royce the 5'9" hasn't realized his full potential either as a soul MC. Not with the group or anything where he's riding the coattails of Eminem, but on his own 2 feet. Um, yeah, so so that's what I want to. Oh, you were talking about Cannabis with the bad beats. Yeah, I mean, that's true with Cannabis too. But I think that with Royce the 5'9", some of his earlier albums did have whack beats. Um, but even with Cannabis, his albums, that album that he had, some of them did have whack beats. Some of the songs on there had whack beats. But he did a song where he was talking about Eminem, and I thought that the beat on that song was cool, and I thought his rhymes were cool. I mean, it's not about his skill set or anything. I definitely think he is one of the greatest MCs, but he just hasn't realized his potential. And maybe it's like, that I don't know what it is. Like maybe he just needs the right producer, the right team, better marketing. Um, oh, somebody mentioned Papoose as another one. Papoose is a great MC, and I didn't learn about him until much later. But he's definitely a great MC, and a lot of times, in terms of whether or not an artist blows up, it's more about marketing. It's about how much they're promoted. Like if they have a team behind them, it's about production and stuff like that. Because somebody like a Papoose is very skilled in terms of his rhymes and stuff like that. He is easily comparable to any of the top tier MCs. It's just about opportunity and about marketing and all that kind of stuff. That's part of the reason why somebody like him is not mentioned among the greatest MCs ever. Yeah, I agree with you. Second Round Knockout was a classic, and it's on my playlist of greatest diss songs of all time. Is as I said before, it's definitely better than Cool J's Response. Yeah, so I'm almost done with this this live. So I'm going to talk about the next thing I'm going to talk about. There's two other categories that I want to mention, and I'm really interested in hearing from y'all about this. And some people mentioned some groups earlier, and that's what I'm going to get into right now. I'm going to mention my favorite rap groups of all time. And these are in no particular order. And my list so far haven't been in any particular order. But one of my favorite groups of all times is the Lox. They're by far one of the greatest rap groups. And I think that they proved that in their battle against Dipset on Versus. I mean, Jada Kiss is probably one of the best MCs ever. And, you know, I could see somebody making the argument that Jada Kiss should be in the top 10. One of the greatest MCs ever. You know, Locks have like some of the greatest features ever. They're on classic tracks. And they've rhymed with some of the greatest in the game, like B.I.G., you know, Biggie, whatever, Jay-Z, DMX. So they're definitely in my list of favorite rap groups of all times. My absolute favorite group of all times is Wu-Tang Clan. Wu-Tang Clan has more talent on their roster than any other rap group, hands down. Just based on not only just the sheer numbers, but just the skills. I mean, you got a Ghostface, Raekwon, you got Method Man, you got Inspector Deck, who's highly underrated, who's a great MC, one of the greatest MCs in the game. So, and they got classic albums, not only as a group. You know, they got two classic albums as far as I'm concerned as a group. You know, the very first album that they released and the Wu-Tang Forever album. Classic albums. Then as individual artists, you got the Purple Tape. You got Iron Man. You got Supreme Clientele. You got, I mean, so many songs, and they're on albums, you know, songs today. They're still very relevant. And I see that Royale said they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Absolutely, man. They are one of the greatest of all times. And for those people who haven't seen it, there's a great series on Hulu. I encourage people to check that out. This about the story of Wu-Tang Clan. A lot of people clown one of the actors for the way he portrays the role of RZA. And it's, you know, but it's a great show. I encourage people to check it out. So another group that's in my top 10 list of rap groups is Outkast. And I know for many, Andre 3000 is on their top 10 list. Even somebody like a Jay-Z has mentioned Andre 3000 as one of the greatest MCs ever. Uh, and, you know, so they're a great group. And despite what other people say, I think that Big Boy holds his own in that group. Like, it's not just being carried by Andre 3000. They make a great team, and they're one of the greatest groups of all times. One of my favorite groups of all times is Mobb Deep. You know, Prodigy is, you know, I would put him in the category of underrated MCs. And I may do a whole category on that if I have time, but Mobb Deep is definitely in there. Been on classic songs with Nas and so many other MCs, released classic albums. You know, Prodigy is one of the best MCs. Havoc holds his own in the group. So yeah, them, EPMD. They got you guys to chill. They got I shot the shirt. They got too many classics to name. Please listen to my demo, man. EPMD is definitely one of my favorite groups. The Roots, I mentioned Black Thought earlier. The Roots are on my list. A Tribe Called Quest. You know, the Tribe Called Quest is probably in my top 3 of rap groups of all times. You know, Q-Tip and his unique flow, his unique style. You know, the whole vibe of A Tribe Called Quest, especially when they first came out with the African attire and the creative, funny rhymes, you know, Left My Wallet and El Segundo and all that stuff. They were one of the first groups that interjected jazz into hip hop, really innovative at the time. Classic albums like Instinctive Travels, you know, what's that album? The second album. I don't know why I'm blanking on the name of the second album. But their second album is probably one of the, you know, is probably one of my favorite albums. And then Midnight Marauders. I'm sure it's gonna come to me. um, but yeah, man. What is the name of that? Tribe album, the second album. I'm gonna be all frustrated after this live stream. But yeah, that second album is a great classic album. The Fugees is another one of my favorite groups. I had mentioned Lauryn Hill earlier. Wyclef definitely has a lot of talent and skills, has great albums of his own. They make a great team. That Ready or Not album, I think that's the name of the album. That's one of the, a classic albums. It features that song by Lauryn Hill, Killing Me Softly, and all the classics. It's a great album. De La Soul. And the last group that I'll mention, De La Soul is another great group. Another group the last group that I'll mention is Little Brother. That's an underrated group, that deserves far more attention than they get, deserve far more respect than they get. So I'm putting them on this top 10 list. Okay, and so the last list I'll go through is favorite producers, and I'll go through that relatively fast. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. But my favorite hip hop producers, of course, Dr. Dre, the Chronic, he produced the Chronic 2000, produced many great classic albums from many great MCs, produced Snoop's album and all these other albums on, Death Row and on Aftermath. So many great albums. Of course, Kanye West produced his own classic albums. One of the greatest of his albums is Beautiful, Twisted Fantasy. Hopefully I'm not messing up the name of that album, but many classic albums. His first album is a classic. Late Registration is a classic. So yeah, and he produced like classic albums from people. Jay-Z, the Blueprint. He was one of the main producers on that album. The joint projects that he had with Jay-Z, incredible. Jay Dilla, he's definitely one of my favorite producers. He's one of the producers. He produced a lot of songs by a lot of the groups that I love, and artists that I love, like Common and Mos Def and The Roots and all, and A Tribe Called Quest. So he's definitely on my list of greatest producers. Then you got Timberland, Pharrell, DJ Premier. You know, you can't even mention hip hop without mentioning DJ Premier. Like when it comes to East Coast rap, like he is by far one of the greatest producers ever. Then you have RZA, Diddy, of course, producing the masterpiece, Ready to Die by Biggie, and other great albums, Money, Power, Respect by the Lox, and it could go on and on. And then Jermaine Dupri, producing a lot of great quality albums from the South and other areas. And apparently, according to these reports I've seen online, Diddy and Dupree are going to have a versus, and I'm really looking forward to checking that out. I want to hear from you. Who do you think will win that versus? And one of my favorite, relatively new producers is Hit Boy. He produced those classic albums with Nas. He's on a lot of the work with Griselda. Griselda is one of my favorite collectives of MCs right now. So yeah, I think that's about all that I want to mention. I'm going to go through your comments real quick before I close out. But then I will mention this, the most underrated MCs. And some of these people I mentioned before. One is Ghostface. I think Ghostface is arguably in the top 10 of MCs, period. One of the greatest MCs. Prodigy is another one who I mentioned earlier. Cormega is another artist that doesn't get the kind of attention that he deserves. His skill level is up there with Nas, but his career hasn't taken off like Nas, but he is still a top tier MC. that deserves his flowers. And you know, I mentioned MF Doom earlier. Um, I was like, MF Doom deserves to be on the top 10, period, despite being underrated by so many people. And the last person I'll mention is Beanie Siegel. Beanie Siegel, um, you know, even Nas said, even though he was in beef and joking, well, I think he was probably just taking shots, but he said that compared to beans, you whacked, and he was talking to Jay-Z. And I can see somebody realistically saying that. Like when you listen to the bars that he has on that song about his father missing in his life and all that kind of stuff, he goes in like he really shines on that track, and he shines on every track that he's on. He tears it down on every track that he's on with Jay Z or any other MC. Like he has this one song where he's on there with Ghostface and Styles P. I think it's Styles P. I think Styles P is on that track, but he just destroys that track, kills it. So he's definitely one of the most underrated MCs ever. You know, he got like songs that move you, that you feel, that not only did you feel and stuff, that have hardcore lyrics like that. What's Your Life Like song, you know, the part one and two and stuff. You know, the song that I had mentioned earlier about fathers and stuff, man. He's definitely underrated. But I want to hear from y'all, for people that are watching this on the playback, who are your favorite MCs of all time? Who are your favorite women MCs of all time? Who are your favorite producers? Who are some of the most underrated MCs as far as you are concerned? And who are people that should have blown up but who never blew up the way they should have? So with that, I'm gonna say peace and blessings. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like this video, share the video, and I hope to do more live streams in the future. So tune in and turn on your notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content. Peace and blessings.